Red Dragon from Nolzurs, was it Marvelous Miniatures? I already lost the thing on it. So we're taking a look at, this video is going to focus on his red scales, which I'm going to do in a pretty simple scheme for everybody. Basically, it's going to focus on the contrast paint. Man, I just totally lost what I was trying to say. So I'm going to start with Contrast Blood Angels Red. And I'm going to do this, like I said, relatively simple. We're going to basically do contrast and then a little bit of dry brushing to give it a little bit of pop. So one reason I'm going with contrast is because contrast is easy peasy. This stuff has been the best thing GW has come out with since like the invention of Warhammer, probably. No, not everybody is totally in love with it, but I sure as heck am. So this stuff is great because it's a paint. It acts like an ink, where it covers the whole surface and then fills in recesses. But it's sweet is the way that it dries. It kind of also creates highlights at the same time. So as my wing was in the way there. Obviously, it works better on certain material, certain textures and everything. In the case of this dragon, it's going to do wonders with these scales, where it's going to really fill in the spaces between the scales, really show off each individual piece. What I like about this stuff is, I know not everybody's in love with it, but why I say it's one of the best things they've ever come out with is because it takes off steps needed to paint and get a good result. Like if you just use contrast paints on a model, is it going to be, award-winning quality? Probably not. I'm sure there are people out there that can get that kind of stuff out of just contrast paints, but what I like it for is that a couple of different contrast paints on a model and you are tabletop ready. It looks good, right? It's not going to be the best thing you've ever seen, but it's also not going to look terrible. It's really hard to use contrast and have a model not come out looking good, I think. So I'm going to focus on these for this model. I'm not going to use them exclusively, especially since I'm going to be dry brushing these scales. You can't really dry brush with contrast. I'm sure you can. That's not what they're designed for, and I just don't think that's going to work for dry brushing. You typically want a light color anyway, so let's see. I'm going to stick with my more traditional paints for that. So you can already see how quickly this is going. This dragon is coming along in just a few moments. So my plan here for this series for the Bearded Dragon is I'm going to do it in a couple shorter videos showcasing a couple different type of things we can do for painting minis and different parts, looking at different textures and things. So obviously this video we're focusing on the red scales. I'll do one about we'll do his like underbelly scales. Just want to put the brush in my mouth to hold it like I usually do, but then I realize I can't talk when I'm doing that. I'm going to go more or less, so get rid of that glare, the picture on the back, the box art here. So we're going to do the red scales. The wings I'm going to do a little bit differently. The membrane of the wings I'm doing a lighter, more fleshy color, just to make it stand out more. And then that'll be another video. Another video will be the underbelly color here. Probably the same with the horns. And then we'll do a video, I don't know if we'll do, well, maybe a whole one about maybe we'll do the fire and the basing together. We'll do a video about basing the model and how to make that look pretty good. Because a lot of people paint their models and then don't know what to do for the base. I'm going to clean off my brush real quick so it doesn't dry. I mean, we could do a whole video about brush care if we wanted to at some point. I don't know if I would say that's like my specialty is the only thing, because, I've been doing this a long time, but Also, I know I'm not the best at taking care of brushes. So it's important to give these pots a good shake up when you open them back up, just to make sure things haven't settled much. You want to make sure you get your different materials in there all together. I mean, I'm no chemist when it comes to paint, but I know there are the different parts of it. You've got your actual color hue. You got, I think it's called primer right in it, and that sometimes can separate, especially in these contrast paints. They're like loaded up with the color pigment in the mix, and sometimes that can really separate. Which reminds me, my apothecary white should be on its side. Thank you, Charlie, for that tip, because these paints tend to really kind of settle. So giving them a real good shake is a good move. Now, lately on different painting Facebook groups, people have been real big on buying paint shakers recently, partly because contrast paints do settle so heavily that having something that shakes it up for you, some people need, because not everybody has, the hand dexterity on their own. Some people need a little bit of help with that. Alrighty, let's make sure the under the jaw is all good. So right now, I'm going to have these little, I don't know, ears, for lack of a better term. I'm just going to paint them it all red right now, and then later I can fix. I'm going to have that match the wings and have it be more of that flesh color between, I don't know what you call these parts here that are kind of the structure of these little winglets on his head. What's nice about contrast, one thing I like about contrast is, I just remembered, I was going to say that they recommend you use the spray. GW came out with these Wraithbone, and I think it's Gray Seer is the other one. Gives you really nice results. And then I just remembered I didn't use it on this, because one thing that's great about Nolzurs, I forgot, is they are pre-primed in the box. They're assembled mostly and already primed, which is pretty sweet. So you don't have to spray them with anything unless you really want to, or you want a different color. They're really just ready to go out of the box. I didn't do anything with this except glue the flying stand. I glued the flying stand and the decorative thing to its round base. That was it. That was all the prep it needed, which I like. Someone that's been painting for almost 20 years, sometimes assembling is one of my favorite parts of it, but once in a while it's nice not to have to. I didn't want to paint those scales there. I just realized it's more of the underbelly. So let's get his other arm. Red dragons are pretty beefy. So this being a red dragon from Nolzurs, this is official D&D stuff, I believe. Yeah. It's interesting. This is the young red dragon, which in the game is a huge creature. Nope. Right? Or is it large? Now I'm forgetting, because they changed it from like 3.5 in Pathfinder. They made him bigger, I think. It was interesting. I thought it was funny. On the box, it said that it comes with a base just like for standing purposes. It's not the right size for games. Like technically, it should take. I think it's supposed to take up more space than it does on that base, which I thought was funny. I was like, well, why not? Why didn't you come with the right size base then? Alright, missed some spots on his other hand. It's funny, his hands kind of look like paws. Which I guess they could, like, dragon. It's a made up creature anyway. Do what you want with it. Let's get this done. So I think what I'm going to do for this video, instead of you just watching me paint the entire thing red, which might get boring after a while, I know I'm highly entertaining, but, we have our limits. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it long enough that I know this part here is dry, and then we'll take a look at dry brushing those scales with one, maybe two colors. The only thing with dry brushing is I'm not totally set up for streaming a whole bunch of painting stuff, I have one dry brush for myself. The problem with it is that once I rinse it off from dry brushing, it's not really useful again until it fully dries. You know, as the name implies. The dry brushing, it needs to be a dry brush, which can take a while because it's actually a pretty big, thick brush. It's got quite a bit that needs to dry before it's really usable again. So we'll take a look at dry brushing just one color today just to kind of see that technique in action. I'll pick something that'll definitely stand out. Maybe we'll dry brush the scales orange so we can really see it and see how a simple technique can make a big difference, which is why I'm kind of focusing on this series. Show that painting is something anybody can do. You don't have to be an artist. You don't have to have done it for years. What's nice about contrast is that I think it's much more inviting for new people to paint this way. Because really, with this red, you could call this done, and it would look pretty good. You slap this down on your D&D table, people are going to be like, whoa, did you paint that? And you'll be like, yeah. And they'll be like, that's awesome. I would hope. My players don't say that usually because they're just used to it. Not to call them out or anything, but they're just like, oh, that's cool. You've painted hundreds of models, so nice job. So while I'm working on this, waiting for that to dry, assuming if you're painting models for something like D&D, awesome, great for you. I applaud you. I think it really adds a lot to the game. Obviously, you can buy pre-painted minis. For me, I'm not a huge fan of like the blind box thing. I really like Nolzurs and the deep cuts, I think is the Pathfinder one, where you can buy exactly what you want and make it look exactly the way you want it to look. The blind boxes are great, you know, especially when the ones that are themed. Like I know the Descent into Avernus had its own set, so like it had a lot of things that were definitely going to be used in that campaign. So like if you're running that game on the table, getting those boxes made a lot of sense. You know, just hoping you got Zariel or whatever else. You know, Gale Force 9 produces specific minis for campaigns as well, which is really cool. They have a deal with Wizards of the Coast to make, I think they're pewter specific models for things, which is pretty sweet. I was looking at it, I was thinking about getting particular models. I know like for Avernus they've got a set that has like Arkin the Cruel and his turtled cleric Krell and his Minotaur bodyguard. I think his name's Torgar or something. That's just a cool set, and like if you know those guys are going to be in your game, it'd be sweet to slap down those models, paint it up, because those come unpainted. Slap those down and be like, yeah, this is what's standing in front of you. Alright. Not quite dry. We'll work on this other wing a bit. But, of course, at the same time, it's not something that's for everybody, because some people run their games online. I got a friend who was currently running through Descent into Avernus, and he's doing it all Roll20, like one day a week. Just kind of like after, you know, people in my friend group, most of us have kids, so after kids are in bed and everything. Tried to play the game, would have been awesome, except I only have a computer from work, a Chromebook, and I just couldn't handle D20 and Discord at the same time, which was really disappointing because I love running D&D and RPGs, but once in a while you just want to play as well. So a little disappointing I couldn't play, but it's great that that's an option out there. One of these days I might get a real computer and be able to do that. Let's finish up this wing, this part of the wing, the muscular part, and then we'll take a look at dry brushing. If there's any particular type of painting technique, particular color you want to see during this like mini series I'm doing for the Bearded Dragon, let me know. I'll see if I can add it in somewhere. I know a lot of people struggle painting yellow. I might just do the membranes of the wings yellow. Maybe I'll just do that instead of the fleshy color I was thinking about before. Contrast, once again, has come to the rescue for that. Painting yellow with contrast is no big deal. You just slap a bunch of Yenden yellow, named after some Eldar there, and it looks good. I said, why, saving steps is such a big deal. I was painting something. I think it was the group model for Marvel Crisis Protocol as a commission. I haven't got my own yet, but I plan on it. And, he's a tree, a group from Guardians of the Galaxy. He's a tree alien, so the big thing with him is that he's going to be brown, basically. So in the past, it would have been paint him brown, like a lightish brown, wait for it to dry, do a wash to fill the recesses so it looks better, wait for it to dry, layer it, probably, pick out the bigger areas with a lighter color, wait for it to dry, maybe dry brush it if that's the way you want to go with that model, let it dry. Anything else with contrasting group, I wish I had a picture, I wish I had him here to show you, but I already gave it back to Tim. With contrast, it was one layer, and then I think I dry brushed it 2 different colors just for some variety. And I added a little bit of green shade here and there again just to kind of break it up for variety, and it was good to go. Pretty sweet. So it saves a few steps, which is awesome. Like right now I'm painting during nap time for my almost 2-year-old, so time is of the essence. I know I've got roughly an hour and a half from when he goes to sleep to when he's going to be up and need the adult back. So I only have so much time to paint when I get the chance. I want to be able to use it well. So something that saves steps, saves time, it can't be beat. It's what I want. This is taking a bit longer to dry than I thought. Let's see if we can find a spot that's a little bit better. So it's just where the paint's a little bit heavier in the recesses where it's still wet. You see the surface of it still is dry. I can touch it. Nothing's on my finger. So I think it's going to be safe to dry brush. So this is my handy dandy dry brush. You can see it's been used quite a bit. If you're curious, what I'm using right now are just the Army Painter series. You can get these right at BD. I love the Wargamer Monster. I use this for base coating most models because the brush tip is pretty big. Once I get to a little bit smaller details, we'll see later on in the Dragon, I use the Army Painter. I think it's just called base coating. It's been used so much the name is worn off. You can see the tip here is much smaller. And then we get into details like when I do the dragon's eyes and whatnot, or if I were painting the edge of each scale or something. We've got, this one says Model Master. I think it's a different, I think it's still Army Painter. And again, I got all these at BD, and we can see the different size of the tips there. So I guess we could potentially talk about paint care or brush care at some point. This one here is getting a little frayed or a little kinked bent at the end, which often just happens with synthetic brushes, unfortunately. Forgot which one that came off of for a moment. Brush covers are good, super important. That's definitely the wrong one. Nice big one for the monster brush. And I dropped the other one. We'll pick that up in a minute. But yeah, so the Army Painter dry brush is nice because it's got one job. So you can see it used to be square at the end, but the fact that it's all flayed out now actually is not a bad thing for dry brushing, I don't think. So what I'm going to do to really show off the dry brushing, I'm going to go with a nice brighter color. If this were my own model, I would go with a red first. If I were painting this just for myself, Evil Sun Scarlet I would use first to give it more red, and then, but in the interest of time here to do this in a single video, I'm going to go with, let's go with Jacaro Orange, which is a base color, so it's a little bit thicker paint, but this will really stand out on those scales. And what's, thing that's kind of nice about this, if I end up not liking it, you can just kind of start over really with contrast. You can just kind of paint over it because it's not going to be real heavy paint. Oof, that was way too much on that brush. This paint's a little old, a bit too thick in there. So dry brushing, like I said, just does what it says on the tin. I'll move this over a little bit, as they say. Close that up so it doesn't dry. And we're going to take most of the paint off the brush, which might sound a little or very counterintuitive. I'm going to build up some on my palette here. My ugly palette, old Warhammer Fantasy movement tray. I mean, I guess you could still use it for that, but some of this paint is like 1/4 inch thick. So I'm going to take off as much of the paint as I can with the palette. And I got this old tissue, which we're going to take off even more of the paint. To test it here. There, we're not getting just a solid orange. And now we're basically just going to do this on the dragon. So I'm going to start going along the scales and see how that looks, and then we'll change the angle and see what kind of buildup of color we can get. I'm going to move the, bear with me, I'm going to move the camera a little bit closer here so we can see this a little more in action. Dry brushing is all about a slow buildup of color. If we get too much change at once, that means we got too much color on the brush, or we're applying it a little too heavy-handed. So you see that I'm going mostly one direction right now, just because these scales are pointing down. I'm bringing my brush mostly just up against it, so we can catch those edges. A little more paint there. Looks really good up here where we get a little, just the edges there. Instead of painting every scale individually, we can get that kind of edge highlight going with a dry brush. Let's hit his face a little bit. So he's still definitely a red dragon. He's not going to become, you're not going to confuse him with like a brass dragon. I don't think he looks orange, but it kind of brightens it up a little bit. Looking at it closer, it might have been a little too much paint on that brush, but that's all right. So that's what we look like after some dry brushing, as opposed to just contrast. I think this makes it a little more realistic looking as well. Like this dragon might not be so bright. Alright, let's try one more. I don't usually do this, but I think it's okay. My brush is quite lacking in paint. I don't want to put it in my water yet, because I don't want to get the brush all wet. I won't be able to use it again until it dries. I'm going to take a little bit of a much brighter orange here. This is Citadel's Layer Fire Dragon Bright, which is real bright, sweet final highlight orange. I love this color to really make things pop. I'm going to take most of it off the brush. I want to take even more than before because I want to just hit it a little bit with this in some of the areas. I'm not going to cover the whole thing with it. I want to make certain parts pop. So I'm going to do a little bit on his arm, kind of like his forearm. We'll do a little bit more of his face, maybe like just the middle of his neck here, just to give it another layer. It's a little more brightness, a little bit of variety, because, you know, you look at things in the real world and not just one color. Obviously, this isn't a real creature, being a red dragon from D&D, but, you know, it'll look better if it looks more realistic. We'll do a bit more on his face, because that's kind of a focal point. Get a little bit more on the brush. There we go, yeah. Like I said, we're not covering every inch of it. All right, now I'm going to rinse off the brush. That soaks up a ton of water because there's a lot of bristles on this thing. Alrighty, put that away to dry for later. So here we go. We got two dry brushes here. We got the, what was it? Jacaro orange for the first layer. A little bit of build up with Fire Dragon Bright on top of the Citadel Contrast Blood Angels Red. Which of course mine's a little messy. That just shows that it's used, right? So here we go with the dry brush. Real easy technique versus without. And again, I still think both of these look perfectly fine. If you did the whole thing with just contrast, I think again, nobody would call you out and be like, oh, you didn't dry brush dragon. If they do, say, just, I don't know, shut up. I don't need to. So I think it really highlights dry brushing up with these higher scales. I think they were a bit bigger. They really caught the edges. If I can get it back in the focus, there we go. Really caught the edges of the scales, and we can really see those two different colors. But I think that came out good. So before the next video, I'm going to finish up the rest of the dragon scales with this technique, and then I think next up we'll take a look at the membranes of the wings here between all the bony parts. Otherwise, thanks for checking in, and you can get all the stuff you need, including the new Young Red Dragon at the Bearded Dragon. Thanks for watching. How do I stop?